This weekend also talks about how there's a definite place. Why is technology pitted against one thing or another when it's a balance? The curse of God.
Right, but you only have so much time.
Well, that's
Actually,
problematic too.
that's the problem. That's why one thing is pitted against the other.
Well, then that is something to be addressed, is how you slow down the day. You work with a different calendar.
Did you get my email, Tessa?
Yes. We just forgot.
That's okay. I just want to make sure you got it.
Yeah. Can you like?
Sure.
It being 6:30, I'll call the meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education to order on February 13th, 2017, the Netherwood Knoll Elementary Cafeteria. Mrs. Wick, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Feeney? Present. Mr. Uphoff?
Present.
Ms. Flanagan? Present. Mr. Raymond? Mr. Kraus?
Yo.
Ms. Maidson?
Yep.
Mr. Zott?
Present. Board has a quorum. I have proof that the meeting has also been properly noticed according to Wisconsin open discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries by unanimous voice vote. I'm going to, it isn't on here, President's Address, but I'm going to do my checkout first just because I think it's relevant for consideration. And one of the things I'm going to start doing is putting our mission statement on top of our agenda so that we're tuned to that. We should be focused on that all the time. But I just wanted to relate a quick story before we proceeded with our meeting. Is my daughter got married to a young Bolivian engineer on Saturday, so his parents were here for the entire week to visit us. So we had the four Monteros with us, and that included two of their high school age students from Bolivia, and they very much wanted to see our high school. So we were over on Friday morning, and Mr. Pleiner was so gracious to serve as our host and to give us a key pog and spoke a few words of Spanish to them, which they were very impressed with. But briefly, I can't tell you how impressed they were with our high school and with all of our schools, because we went around and looked at all the other schools. Their jaws dropped when they saw what we did in our school and the quality of education in the United States. We talked to a number of teachers, and we ran into Chris Prawl, who led us back into the shop area, so the solid woodworking area and the metalwork area. And we got into the ag area, and we saw all the music stuff and all the athletic facilities and all the academics. My daughter's father-in-law is a pretty successful businessman in the largest city there in Santa Cruz, and he commented that he isn't frustrated, as was one of the leaders in the community, at the lack of support that public education has there, or education in general. And so as we debate in this country public education and other alternative forms of education, we shouldn't take for granted what we have here and the amount of surplus that we have in terms of education. Not that there can never be any surplus, but compared to Bolivia and other countries where they go to school for half a day, where they have schools without windows, where textbooks and computers are a luxury and not a necessity or a right, we should feel ourselves fortunate. And so as we sit as a collaborative body, let's remember that mission. On a sadder note, I would like to report that Carl Ahrens passed away, I think, in December. Carl was a long-term educator and administrator in this district. He was my junior high school principal when this building was a junior high, and he was down there. He was an amazing man, an amazing educator, and the district profited greatly by his presence here. We give his condolences to his family. He had 3 children, all of whom attended Oregon High School. One of note was his son David, who was a terrific athlete and played at the University of Wisconsin for 4 years, was its captain, and played 10 years in the National Football League, and comes back on a regular basis. So our condolences to the Aaron's family. With that, we've got a consent calendar. Is there any board member want anything removed from the consent agenda calendar this evening?
I'll need to abstain from the minutes.
Okay, so you will be able to vote per our normal practice, and Janie will mark that as an abstention because you had missed the prior meeting. Are there any other, anything else anybody wants removed? Okay, that being said, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Mr. Raymond with the motion and Charles with the second. I would note a number of donations. Our splash pad continues to receive donations. Dean Baumgartner donated $200, as did the Beecher family and Caitlin and Peter Young. And we had a young donor. I think you saw it in your packet with the picture.
That was sweet.
Becca Herkey, who donated $10 with an amazing note to thank that for the, I will be writing Becca a personalized note thanking her for that. And it just shows you that, you know, there's never a donation that's too small. And you're never too young to learn philanthropy. The Brooklyn School District had 2 donations. Community Bank of Middleton had a $150 donation, and the VMIC Foundation donated $200 for the Green and Healthy Schools workshop. The district received a $169 gift from the Couillards for speech purposes, and then Karate America gave us a $250 donation, and then the Oregon Educational Foundation provided us a grant with $450 for the Project Girl. So we acknowledge all those donations and thank those folks for their generous support of the Oregon School District. With that being said, we have a motion and a second. And yeah, so I'm going to have them call the roll just because we have a resignation amongst that.
Mr. Raymond?
Yes.
Mr. Uphoff?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Ms. Maidson?
Yep.
Mr. Zak?
Yes, motion carries with respect to the items on the consent calendar by unanimous voice vote with the abstention of Mr. Raymond as noted. Under section B, communication from the public, the board policy 18004 established the opportunity for members of the community to address the board at this meeting. Is there any member from the community that's here who wants to speak? Anybody registered?
No.
Anyone wish to speak with the community? Last call. We'll move on to item C then, OEA report. Is there anyone from the OEA? Don't see anyone. Tessa, that means you're up.
Okay. So I have kind of a shorter report tonight, but the new academic wing was opened like 3 weeks ago-ish, and I actually have 2 classes in there, and everyone that I've talked to absolutely loves it. It's such a cool new like learning environment, and I'm really excited for the future years for it. Also, the winter dance was on Saturday, and that was very successful, and it was just kind of like a safe night for students. And also, so then after that, due to weather, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was like the 25th of January, I wasn't able to go to the Vision Steering Committee, so I'll need to follow up with Jeff after the meeting, but that's all I have for tonight.
Great. Yep, and you had called early
Yes.
that day saying like, I'm not driving. And I said, I don't blame you for not driving. So you guys will connect up because we've got some things working with that. So.
Yes.
Good. Board members, if you, we should arrange at some point if you want to go over and see the new academic wing, and it's really good to see it during the day. If you want to do that, contact me, and we'll try to arrange for a time before school starts, I think early, right away, Jim. We'll work out a time that works, so I don't want everybody going over at different times. But it's amazing, because I got through with our Bolivian family, and it's amazing to see the space used the way it was designed to be used in terms of personalizing your learning and collaborative space. It's really good. So we'll work that out so that we can see that. Actually, I'll work it out. We'll work out some collective dates, and we'll get a Google poll or Doodle poll out for you guys, okay? And we'll work with Jim. Okay, that takes us to our public hearing, and this is a public hearing to alter a school district boundary. We have a petition from Matthew Doyle to detach a portion of property that belongs in the Albany School District and move it into the Oregon School District. And so I will call that meeting to order as the chair, having been designated in the notice as such. And I would appoint Gina Jonan as secretary of the hearing, subject to a motion. So could I have a motion to appoint Gina as the secretary for the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Barb? Okay. And would you call the roll?
Mr. Uphaw?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Raymond?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Ms. Mason?
Yep.
Mr. Zak?
Yes, so Gina, you are the secretary, and let the record reflect through that roll call vote the fact that all board members are present for the public hearing under Chapter 117 of the statutes, okay? Unless there's any objection, I'm going to not read the notice of hearing, but include that in the record as having been properly noticed. I see no objection to that. So if the secretary would indicate that there's no objection to inclusion of the notice of the hearing as noticed into the record. Board members, you have a packet before you. You should have the script of, and I'm not going to go through this and read it verbatim, but the 7 factors that we are to consider are listed on the first page and the second page, and they talk about the geography, the educational needs, the programming, the testimony, the fiscal effect, whether or not we have non-contiguous property, and the socioeconomic and racial composition. Those are all relevant factors for us to consider. Mr. Doyle is not here with us tonight because he's attending the Albany School District meeting that has the same agenda item. On it, he has conferred with Dr. Bussler, and I think at this time, I would turn it over to Dr. Bussler to give us an overview of the petition. And then you also should, in addition to the materials, did you pass this?
I did not.
Okay, Brian's going to pass out a district map so we have a little broader focus of the property and where it sits in relationship to the district.
Mr. Zak,
Yep.
would you like these marked as exhibits?
Yeah, why don't we mark the map that has just gone around as Exhibit 1.
Okay, it looks like Jeff has a copy, so
And-
I am going to
Yeah,
get
and then we
started.
got a second one that has gone around, which is Exhibit 2.
Board members, just to draw your attention, the first exhibit I know you are familiar with. It is a 8.5 by 11 picture of the Oregon School District with the northernmost portion of the town of Blooming Grove and the southernmost portion, the village of Oregon. You will notice this, I will call it a blue star. It might look like an ink spot, but this is intended to give you a sense of where the property in question is. The property in question is right across from existing Oregon School District property, and if you look at exhibit number 2, it looks like this. And exhibit number 2, to my eye, I will call this lavender, and this color peach. And Janie's smiling, did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Peach is the Albany School District, lavender is the Oregon School District, and you'll notice the property identified as 171. Those are 2 vacant lots. When you add those properties together, it's approximately 30 acres in total, and the tax value on both of those properties is around $90,000. So the public school tax value is plus minus $1,000 to $1,200. So Again, a small amount by comparison to our $2 billion worth of total tax base. As Mr. Zock mentioned, there are some specific criteria that boards are required by state statute to weigh in this process. I'll also share a conversation that I had with Matthew today, and just to underscore the fact that he would like to be here, but he also wanted to be in the Albany School District and felt there's a greater likelihood that Oregon will attach, and he wanted to have that conversation in person with Albany. I'll share what he shared with me so you have the same amount of information. He has had a conversation with the Albany School District, and he said they were open to detachment. That's perhaps not always what we will get when we bring a detachment to the school district, and the reason they're open to detachment is he has 2 children that are currently in the Oregon School District, and one of his children has an IEP. He also, his girlfriend, who he is planning on marrying and building a home on this property, also has 2 children that are in the Oregon School District. So potentially, it could impact 4 children in total. In terms of the geographic estimate, the travel time to Oregon, the village of Oregon, is about 4 miles. The travel to Albany is about 8 miles, so Oregon is closer. In terms of educational needs, his 2 children are already in the school district. His fiance's 2 children are already in the school district. And again, I want to respect his 1 child that has an IEP, but those children, his children, have been in the district for quite some time. In terms of impact on educational programming, the Albany School District is significantly smaller than us. I don't have the actual enrollment off the top of my head, but with our enrollment, including open enrollment, being around 4,000 students, it's not going to cause us a burden, nor is it going to cause a burden, in my estimation, with the Albany School District, because their students are, these 4 young people are already in Oregon. In terms of the fiscal effect, this is vacant land. Its value is $90,000. Once he develops and puts a residential property on it, it's obviously going to increase in value. But you know how the state aid formula works. If you receive more tax value, you receive less state aid. So that has a balancing factor. And again, at this point, the approximate land value is. When we answer that question 2 different ways. Looking at Exhibit 2, again, lot portion of 171 behind 172, but I'll call that 183. It adjoins to the Oregon School District, and depending on your interpretation of contiguous, we are connected to lot 119. If you notice right here, a real tiny lot at a crossroads, so right across the street. Although some people might argue that lots 183 and 182 represent an island. But we have islands in the Oregon School District as well. We have an island in the city of Fitchburg with a business and commercial property. In terms of the last item I'll address is socioeconomic level and racial composition. Because this involves 4 students, we don't see that being a significant factor at all in the Oregon School District, or conversely, out of the Oregon or out of the Albany School District. So I will stop with that and see if there are any questions. And Gina has also helped me on this, and if you have any comments that you'd like to underscore or share, I will yield to you at this point.
Well, right now, we'll get questions in a minute. That gives us an overview according to our process. Now we'll hear it from either the proponents or opponents of the petition and come back with questions and recommendations or considerations. So, are there any proponents for the petition present here this evening? Are there any proponents for the petition? Are there any proponents for the petition? Okay. Any opponents for the petition? Are there any opponents to the petition? Any opponents to the petition? Okay. Gina, if you would let the record reflect that there are no proponents or opponents to the petition this evening, and so we'll conclude that portion of that. And Dr. Bussler and Gina, if you have anything further from a legal standpoint to present regarding this?
I do not.
Okay, then I'll address it over to the board members for any questions or comments at this time. Jeff, and I'll walk right down through that.
I assume any busing changes would be minimal to get transportation down Smith Road?
Correct. I had a conversation with Mark today, and it's the fact that those were decisions changed hands.
That's all.
I do have a recollection that over the years, we have had a number of petitions with respect to the land south of Amadon Road, so a lot of that has been add-on over the years from the Albany School District into ours, and that's why you've gotten this, because they're actually closer to Brooklyn than they are to Albany at that point. Okay, any other questions, Jeff?
No.
Barb?
Those were my two questions.
Yep.
So.
Krista has none. Dan, anything?
So just to be clear, what the state says is we have to have a contiguous district, right?
That's one of the factors, one of the factors that they consider is whether or not it renders any part of the district.
So it's a factor, but it's not a deciding, it's not a necessary factor.
That's correct.
Okay.
And these factors I should have explained, maybe this will be helpful. If you remember last year, we had two requests. There was a request from the Stoughton, a property in the Stoughton School District, then a request from a property in Belleville. And where those factors really get weighed is at
Bus route. But maybe that's, I don't know, they might be on a bus route now that they wouldn't have to be picked up somewhere else, so.
Sure.
In the end, you say that the difference between the state aid and the taxes is gonna be minuscule.
Yeah,
So-
one property's not.
So if we
gonna have-
do add this, then we're gonna have more money to some small extent coming from property taxes than from the state aid. So it's gonna shift our reliance ever so slightly towards property taxes and away from state aid.
It would again go to whether that house has students coming out of it, which it sounds like we have students coming out, our same students, they're just moving to this house. So it depends on how you look at that. If they don't,
Well, the school district taxes every single piece of property, whether there's students in it or not.
right,
And that's what I'm saying, we're gonna be adding property if this happens. So we will get a net increase in property that we can tax
correct.
on this. So on a $200,000 house, I'm guessing, and I don't know this is right, but that's gonna be maybe $1,000 worth every year that we get as a district.
Probably more than that.
Okay, let's just say it's 1,000.
Right. You're kind of simplifying things a little bit because the state aid is based on the number of students that live in the district and property values. Those are the two competing components. So it really does depend on how you want to count those 4 kids. If they move out to this house and it's not in our school district, then we lose those resident students. They could open and roll in if there's space available and we're accepting students in that range. We then would have less dollars to spend because open enrollment dollars are less than resident dollars. So there's just
So let me,
make a decision based on where the property tax comes out of this. I think that's kind of it's so minuscule, I don't know that I would base that decision on that.
I realize that it's a small amount, but it's an incremental amount. And I'm just trying to think through this because we're getting less and less and less and less and less and less state aid. And I'm not expecting that we're gonna be getting a lot more or that our revenue limits are gonna go up. If we can rely more and more on our tax base by expanding it or improving it, that may be better for the district in the long run. Like you say, and like I understand, it's a small amount, but the more property as a school district that we can tax, the more stable we're probably gonna be in the long run. I don't wanna belabor the point, it's just a small shift
Yep.
that I see in that case.
Keeping these students residents financially would be advantageous to us. I can tell you that, which means that having this property come into the district. The new formula that the governor's been talking about, the categorical aids that we get, are based on membership, not based on open enrollment. They're only based on membership. So therefore, keeping them in the district is much more beneficial to us than losing or having them become open enrolled. That's
So
more
the
significant.
bigger advantage of bringing this property that you see into the district is gonna be that we keep our 4 residents as residents
Absolutely.
instead of the other, what I see as a side benefit of increasing the taxable area
Yeah.
of the school district. Do we know how, and this is my last question, do we know how Albany, they're a smaller district. We know that there's problems with the way that Wisconsin allocates state aid amongst districts, and it's not very fair. On the whole, though, our district hasn't been terribly impacted as some smaller districts have, some smaller and shrinking districts. Is this going to be a net harm, do we think, to the Albany School District? And should we be considering that?
I think you could actually make an argument that it would help them in a very small incremental way, because as you become, again, it's that intersection of number of students that are residents and property values that determine where property taxes come from. If you become too rich, and you can become too rich lots of different ways. One way is you have a big business park. You actually start losing state aid as you spend money. In Albany's case, the reason they're harmed is because they have less students. Okay, their student population is decreasing. I'm guessing this a little bit, but that's probably a pretty educated guess that they've been losing students. So if you keep property and lose students, that means even though you have less money to spend, you're richer in the eyes of the state, and therefore they will take state aid away from you. So that I could argue both sides of that, is what I'm trying to say. But it's a fairly involved analysis to get to that point. They probably would not say that they'd be happy about it. I'm probably fairly sure in that situation, but it doesn't harm them as much as one might think.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I had concerns about transportation, but that has been answered. So other than that, we did have something similar in this area earlier, didn't we? Or am I thinking about the Stoughton? But I thought it was more this area.
The Belleville property
Belleville,
was,
that's what I
was
thought.
closer to this.
Right,
area.
right. Okay, thank you. And it just, I was remembering that. We accepted that property, didn't we?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and the Stoughton property was, Janie will know this exactly, I'll say closer to where Highway A is.
Right.
Yeah, between 138 and 8.
Gotcha. Okay.
So about the center of our district.
Okay. I don't have any questions. I would note that when we look at the factors I think in terms of the geographic or topical characteristics of the travel time, that favors our attaching it. The educational needs of the children favors attaching it. The programming favors attaching it. We don't have any written statements filed by the residents of the affected school districts other than the petition and the desire for them to keep their children in the district, so that favors attachment by the district. The fiscal effect is minimal. Whether it's non-contiguous or not, I would note that lots 160, 183 and 182 are connected to the district by a point dot, and that's been approved, and this is the same thing, so we're there, and then I don't think G, the socioeconomic and racial compensation, is relevant to this consideration, so from my standpoint, I think it meets all the criteria for attachment. Charles?
Andy, do you know if Albany is currently eligible for sparsity aids at all? Or?
I do not know their district well enough to sparsity aids based on geographical area, so I'm not.
There's something in the governor's proposal.
Yep.
Budget proposal for an increase for
Yep.
sparsity aid. For
Yep. And based on the population that Tim just said, and I wasn't aware of, they would definitely be eligible for the enrollment component of that, which is lower than 750 students.
Right.
But I need to know the geographical location, and because what you do is you divide the students in the geographical location to find out if it meets the sparsity aid, and I'm not real familiar with that component of the proposal.
You have to know the acres,
Sure.
the acreage, because it's 10
Size of
students.
district.
Is it 10?
It's 10 students per acre.
Anything else, Charles?
No.
Okay, and Gina, we've got exhibits 1 and 2 marked. Does the petition go in as a matter of record, or should we mark that as exhibit 3 just so that we've got it identified?
It would go in as a matter of record.
Okay, same with the notice?
Yes.
So we don't have to, those are just exhibits to the public hearing portion of that, okay.
Correct.
And Dr. Bussler, is there an administrative recommendation then with respect to the petition?
Yes, the administrative recommendation is in your board packet, and the recommendation is to approve the detachment from the Albany School District and attachment to the Oregon School District.
Okay. And so we have a sample motion. Their motion 1 would be to follow the administrative recommendation, that is to detach from Albany and to attach to Oregon. So that's motion number 1. Motion number 2 is to deny that transfer. So I would entertain a motion at this point in time.
I'll move to grant the transfer.
So motion number 1 to grant for transfer under that language. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Ms. Mason seconds that motion. So the motion is that the reorganization requested in the petition filed February 1, 2017 be granted, and an order entered detaching the territory described in said petition from the Albany School District and attaching said territory to the Oregon School District. That is the motion, and it has appropriate second. And Ms. Jonah, would you hand out the ballots then? And if you are in favor of that motion, indicate with a yes, and if you are opposed, with a no. Would you tabulate the results and let us know what they are?
Seven in favor, 0 opposed.
And let the record reflect that then of this hearing. Then we would need to adopt a resolution authorizing the issuance of an order, and you have a sample resolution as part of your packet. It would be 2017-02, and it would be that language. And then down on the bottom, in the now therefore be it resolved that an order be issued and filed granting the petition upon which the hearing has been held, and that would have the person who makes the motion second in there, the yes or no, and Krista would sign it then. So I would need a motion to adopt this resolution.
So moved.
Mr. Raymond makes the motion to approve resolution number 2017-02. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Feeney makes a second, so if you could have that included in the resolution. Okay, and then I would have you, when you're ready, Janie, take a roll call of that.
Okay. Mr. Raymond?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes.
Mr. Uphoff?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Just a minute, I want to finish reading the resolution. Yes.
Ms. Mason?
Yes.
Mr. Zak?
Yes, that motion carries by a 7-0 vote, and if you would have the resolution filled in appropriately and have Ms. Flanagan sign it as clerk of the board, and then pending appeal, if any, that would be, and approval by the Albany School District, that would be effective July 1st of this year. Is there anything else we need to consider this evening before I declare the public hearing adjourned, Dr. Bussler?
Nothing.
Gina? Charles?
Just a question, is the age of the students where they're currently attending, those students are presently within the district?
They're residents of, two are residents of the school district, the petitioner and with his friend, those two kids are also in the district.
No, I understand, I was just wondering, are they going to Brooklyn currently, or high school, or?
I believe it's RCI, but I would have to double check, unless Jeannie knows off the top of your head.
Brooklyn and RCI, I think.
We have a first grader and a third grader that are involved in that right now.
Okay. I think we're finished with that, so I will declare the public hearing adjourned at this time, which would be 7:10 p.m. That takes us to action items under E, and then we have two policies reported out from the policy committee. The first one is 612 student memorials, and Ms. Feeney, the floor is yours as chair of policy committee.
This last meeting, we reviewed and approved two policies. I'm going to have Gina give a background on these and walk us through.
Okay, first one is 612, but we'll take these one at a time.
Okay. So in terms of 612, what started the conversation is that unfortunately, based on events last year, we discovered that we really should have a policy on student memorials. Because we have families that wanted to do that, and we didn't really have clear direction of what would make sense for our community. And so that really led us to a great conversation in policy committee, and we looked at it over 2 meetings. And what we came to consensus around is that what is most beneficial, we feel, to our students is to have scholarships, and that we have a number of families that want to donate scholarships. So we just wanted to use that as a way to really outline how that would work when families want to make scholarships. So the policy is really twofold. One is that to let the community and our families know that we really greatly appreciate donations in the form of scholarships, and that people are encouraged to do that and to work with us in terms of setting the criteria for who is eligible for those scholarships. And that's a mutual decision. And Mr. Uphoff is familiar with that process. And then in terms of memorials, that if a family does want to establish a memorial for a student or a staff person, that we would ask it be in the form of a scholarship as well, and that we would work with the family to establish that and make that process as easy as possible. And then we also just wanted to clarify that in terms of donations for equipment, that we really encourage people to talk to us first before they're donated, so that we can make sure that they go to the best place possible.
Great. And Barb, did this was this approved at the policy committee meeting? Okay, so this is a motion coming from policy committee, And so it does not need a second, so that, I'm gonna take that as a motion from you to approve the revisions to 612 that are before us this evening. Is there any discussion on that? Any questions? Any questions first, Charlie?
And just, I think part of the discussion background of this was a concern that some types of donations other than scholarships might represent some challenges for the district in terms of maintenance, in terms of so logistics of particularly physical things which might have to be relocated in case of future expansions and that kind of stuff.
Great, thanks. Anyone else have any questions or comments, Gwen?
So, family can't like donate a tree anymore? Is that what I'm hearing?
You have to ask the policy committee.
I don't think this policy prohibits any particular kind of gift, although as it says in 612.03, we're asking for consultation with the district. And of course, some kinds of gifts have to conform to consumer product safety requirements. So, no, it is not saying a family could not give a tree, but we are asking that they consult with the district before they make a gift.
And the reason I asked is because it, initially it just says like in form of a scholarship, so that, and traditionally there's been trees given, benches, etc. So that's still available as a gift. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, but as it says, they should be
Consult.
made after consultation.
Okay, that's not how I read the policy. I don't know what the conversation, it looks to me like for student or staff memorials, if we're gonna have a memorial that is along those lines, that we'll accept a scholarship and not physical property. And that's what I heard from Gina.
That's what I was concerned with.
Yeah.
I think, what we would like is that we really, is have the conversation with the families, and that we really feel the best way to memorialize the student or staff member is in the form of a scholarship, because as Charles talked about, it's difficult for us to guarantee in terms of a tree or a bench that those wouldn't be moved. I mean, we just underwent a big construction project and had to move some trees, and so we prefer not to be in that situation. But I think in terms of Barb, obviously it's a horrible situation that may need some flexibility.
Dan?
Well, that's an interesting point. Well, with the scholarships, who administers the scholarship, and what office within the district is going to be taking charge of that, or has already taken charge of previous scholarships?
So Student Services does that, and most of them come from the high school, so they advertise, they talk about the criteria, they work with kids to apply, and then, I'll turn over to Dr. Bussler.
No, you're going down a good track, but
okay. I was like,
I have a little addition to that.
okay.
So tell me when you're ready for the
I'm
addition.
ready.
Board members, you will remember that if a scholarship is created, it generally comes to the district office, and then we bring it to all of you for approval. Actually, I'm working on a scholarship right now with the Oregon Youth Baseball Club, and at your next meeting, we will bring that recommendation to approve their annual scholarship. So the scholarship donators get to determine if they will identify who the recipient is, or most scholarship donators will turn it over to the high school, I'll say counseling / student services department to make that selection. But ultimately, if it is a scholarship, it will come back to all of you, to the sitting board for approval before anything is dispersed.
So we
Anything else,
assume,
Dan?
yeah, we assume that those scholarships are something that would go on year after year until the funds that were designated dry up, or does it depend on the size of the gift, or
Families
whether
do
it's
it one
an
of two
ongoing
ways.
gift?
Sometimes they will give us money. If they ask for my feedback would be, don't give us a fixed sum, because all we can invest in is money market interest, and you would be much better off to invest that in some sort of equity or growth fund, so your proceeds would increase. That's nowadays, most families hold on to the principal and just write us a check every year for the amount that they wish to be dispersed. But if they provided it to us in principle, it would go to Andy, and Andy would put it in our Fund 71 and would manage it as an asset of the school district.
And finally, I assume that that's tax deductible for the donor.
Yes, yes. Andy's office provides the equivalent of a 501c3 or 501c3
We'll just recognize
receipt.
we'll recognize the donation and then it's between that person and their tax advisor as to how to do that. But typically, we're a governmental unit, so we're treated the same as a 501c3 for those types of donations.
Thanks.
Anything else, Dan?
That's it.
Krista? Barb, anything, any questions for Jeff? Okay, I'll go back. Charlie has one.
Yeah, as a practical matter, my understanding is that a significant number, if not the bulk of the scholarships are actually routed through something like the Oregon Educational Foundation, which is a community national bank. You know, they sort of oversee a number of them. It really makes it easy because they have the 501c3 status. It takes a lot of the work out of it. Basically, the money's just sort of passed through the Educational Foundation, and that makes the whole process both transparent and relatively easy to administer.
That would be a third option.
Gwen?
Going back to 612.03, I'm concerned about the word donation, and I'm wondering if we could find a better definition for that, because I still, it still seems like scholarships are the only method of a memorial. And I do know that sitting on the park board, there are a couple of parks that are, even though they're small, one in particular is very small, but it's very meaningful to the family to have an actual physical thing to go along with the memorial. And I'm just wondering if we can go back and discuss what the definition of a donation is. And I understand the problem with moving objects, etc., or cutting down trees, but I think that, moving a bench is not that difficult, and all we need to do is ask the family for their forgiveness and, donate another tree. And, keep the love going.
Krista?
I guess that the way I read it is I look at 61201 and it said the Board of Education appreciates the donations of scholarships, gifts, bequests, and property. So then when you reference donations below, I think it encompasses those things.
Got a motion on the floor from a committee. Charlie, did you have something else?
Yeah, only to add, again, having been part of the conversation, my understanding is similar to what Gina had articulated in that it would not necessarily preclude donations other than scholarships, but it establishes what I think is a clear and appropriate expectation that there will be consultation with the district prior to making a donation, so that issues relating to the logistics feasibility of relocating something if it were donated is something that has been discussed with the district, and if a decision then is made to accept donations other than scholarships, presumably that would follow that kind of consultation.
Okay. We've got a motion on the floor from the committee. Mrs. Wood, would you call the roll? And that
Yes.
would be to approve the changes to 612 as before us.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes.
Mr. Uphoff?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Raymond?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Ms. Mason?
Yes.
Mr. Zak?
Yes. That policy and the revisions are to it are approved by unanimous roll call vote. The next policy from committee is 316, early admission, and Barb, the floor is yours.
Okay, so most of the revisions in this policy are technical in nature. You'll see that the guidelines, early admission administrative guidelines, are attached. I guess, Gina, you said the board doesn't necessarily or always approve those guidelines, but...
And we are just approving the policy 316, and administration
Right.
modifies the guidelines as they see fit.
Right,
without board
but
approval.
the committee did discuss the guidelines, and a lot of the guidelines, as you see, were eliminated. But I think the agreement we came to is that something is going to be put on the website that will give guidance to parents about how they should evaluate making a request. So, Gina, do you want to add anything to that?
Just that we really, the suggestion came from Carol Wilson, who is our school psychologist at the elementary level that does the evaluations and conversations with families. And so these were suggested by her to really update the policy to be in line with what our practice actually is.
And Barb, this was approved by appropriate motion at the policy committee?
Correct.
Okay, so this is a motion coming from policy to approve these revisions to 316. Does anybody have any questions of the policy committee regarding these proposed changes? Dan?
I guess I didn't understand about the guidelines. Are we not considering the guidelines right now? Is that just for our
That is
information?
correct. Yes.
So what's the change then in the policy that what's the gist of it? If we're not considering the guidelines, which,
Well, the changes in the policy are noted by overstrike or underline, and they read like they're fairly
so I'm asking
technical.
okay. So I'm asking the committee chair, what, basically you added guardians to parents, so now it's parent/guardian.
And, right.
And the line about open enrollment. So there's really nothing substantive, I don't see.
I would agree.
I am a little concerned that we're, because of what's attached here, we're giving a lot less guidance to the parents, and I would hope that that's going to be fleshed out with new guidance.
Well, as I just said, something is going to be put on the website that parents can review while they are thinking about this issue to help them decide if their child is, if they should be making a request for early entry.
So let me ask a question then about that. If we're not being asked to approve the changes to the guidelines, why is it, number one, why is it being provided to us? Number two, why is the committee talking about what's going to happen and, what's expected to happen if it's really not the committee or the board's purview to do this?
Number one, Dan, it's usually provided to us for information purposes so that we know what's going on in our oversight role. And two, I'm assuming that's the same reason why policy has done it. It's a way we've operated for a long time, and policy is when we're making a change to the policies. At the same time, the administrative team usually goes through the guidelines, and we review those at the same time. But it's not subject to board approval pursuant to our board governance standards.
Sure.
Charlie?
Yeah, my understanding from the conversation we had in policy committee is that the inclusion of the guidelines is really just to provide context.
Yes. Yep. Any other questions or comments before we take a vote? Okay.
I just wanted to make the comment that I think it's great that we update the guidelines, especially if they haven't been working like what's written here. But I just wanted to say that I hope that new guidelines are put out so that the parents do have some guidance as to when is proper and when is not to really make this request.
Relating to Barb's comment earlier, I think the expectation was that having those kind of comments or guidelines available on the website would be more useful than just having them in a document which parents would, in most cases, likely never see.
And as a parent that went through the process, the process is you contact the district, and it's a very good process in terms of who meets with you, what you're given. And so, as we said with the committee, that they're going to update these guidelines. It's going to be more readily available, but there is a process behind the guidelines of what the school district goes through.
Okay. Janie, would you call the roll to the approval of the revisions of 316 forwarded by the policy committee.
Ms. Feeney,
Yes.
Mr. Uphoff,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Raymond,
Yes.
Mr. Kraus,
Yes.
Ms. Mason,
Yes.
Mr. Zak.
Yes, motion carries by unanimous roll call vote. Thanks, Barb and Gina, for bringing those forward. Next item, we're into the discussion portion of our agenda, and that would be our 5-year budget plan. And Andy, this is your presentation, so we gave you plenty of time to get the PowerPoint fired up. So Andy every year brings to us an update in terms of our 5-year budgeting, and this is his chance. And you'll be pleased to know that when we get to our new boardroom, we'll have flat screen TVs and a computer plug-in rather than PowerPoint with a projector, so hang tight, we're only like a couple months away.
So thank you for your attention tonight. This is, as Mr. Zak said, just a kind of a presentation. It's every year, we call it the financial plan, but it's actually more of a enrollment projection. As our previous discussion kind of illuminated to you, our financials are completely dependent on how many students we serve. Every dollar that we get is attributed to a student in either a residential situation or in an open enrollment situation. And we're going to talk about our trends in the past and then use those trends to kind of extrapolate into the future where we see we're going. So let's get into it. So the first thing that we always kind of start with each year, and it starts about in January, and we track on a weekly basis how many kindergarten students that we have. And then by tracking them, and we've tracked it for, I don't know, at least 10 years probably, we track it week to week, we can kind of see trends. Are we trending basically better than last year, or the last 2 years, or 3 years ago, or the same, or lower? And so we can kind of anticipate, both from a staffing perspective, but also from a longer range perspective, because we project out for 5 years. Although I'll tell you that I wouldn't put too much credibility into those numbers past a couple years. We project out there from a financial point of view because of the financial situation of the revenue cap, which determines how much money we have. So the nice thing here is you can see the number of residents is the red line. The number of packets we sent out each year is the yellow line. And you can see they both pretty much follow each other, and they are trending upward. So the number of packets we get are based on, and I'm going to mess this up, but information from the county, which basically gives us addresses of people that have had babies approximately 4 years ago. So that's how we kind of get our database started. We also have the advantage these days of 4K enrollment. And 4K enrollment kind of tracks with our elementary age, our kindergarten students as well. Interesting trend if you look at this with kind of an up and down thing going on over the last couple of years. But I think if you put a trend line on this, you would also see that it's kind of going up a little bit. 4-year-old kindergartens, by the time they get to kindergarten, more students come to us. So we get probably about 75% of the students that are coming to us in 4K, and then those numbers become larger when they get to kindergarten. Too fast. So here's our enrollment history, and again, I want to be careful to define this because I think you've heard us talk about we have 4,000 students in our district, and we're real close to that. I am talking about membership. So these are people that live in our school district. That's very important in this report. These charts, by the way, do come from your agenda items, and there's a little bit more data for you to digest in that report, but feel free to kind of follow along if you'd like. So this is the membership, and how we do the membership is based on the best data that we know. And so we know that first graders become second graders, and second graders become third graders, and so it's simply kind of a roll-up, if you would. We then only have to guess basically on the kindergarten information, which, as I showed you in the prior slides, we have pretty good data on that from either 4K or from the number of packets that we sent out. So then we do a projection on our kindergartners, and that kind of rolls forward. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than that because things happen from year to year. And so in your report, we talk about kind of net migration. Net migration simply means how many kids are, when first grade became second grade last year, did we go up, did we go down, what happened and then we kind of do a several year average on what those things are that happened in those grades, and then we apply that factor. And those factors in our district have typically been positive. So that helps us grow the numbers of students over the years. So you can see that back in 12-13, if we looked at just our pre-K enrollment, our K-12 enrollment, we were at about 3,400 kids. And this year we're at about 3,521, so we're up about 121 kids over that 5-year period. So then here's what I was talking about before, our net migration type of thing, or net enrollment change per year. You can see that these are numbers that we apply based on averaging numbers over the last several years and kind of add them to it. I can tell you that they vary fairly significantly from year to year, but you can certainly see some trends in there that we then apply toward our numbers. You can see there are some negatives as well as positives on the 5-year average that the averages that we do, but for the most part, the net migration on the bottom here shows a positive. This one year we had a decrease. Sorry. So then we simply take the roll-up information, we add the migration information, or the net enrollment change from year to year, and we get new numbers that we can project out to the future. Now, like I said before, I wouldn't bet the house on the numbers in 2020, but I think the next couple of years, I think we have a pretty statistically good trend. So you can see that we're growing. Again, the top line is K-12, the bottom line is 4K, so we're just adding that extra class of students. And you can see that we're still a little bit lower than the 4,000, but the other part of this picture, as far as number of students that we do educate, are our open enrollment students. I do want to make one other point. In these numbers are students that go other places too, because open enrollment, when students go to Stoughton or Madison, and we're going to talk about that toward the end of the presentation, we get to count them as residents. Just like other districts that send open enrollment kids to us, get to count them as residents. So everybody gets to count somebody as a resident, regardless of where they go. It's just that the open enrollment dollars, which is less than the resident dollars, follow the students. So our revenue limitation formula is based on a 3-year average. The state legislature, in their wisdom a number of years ago, probably close to 2 decades, not quite, over 2 decades, said that we didn't want drastic swings on a year-to-year basis to impact school districts, so they kind of put an averaging thing in there, which basically mitigates or slows the impact of year-to-year average changes. So you can kind of see on the first 5 years are historical, and then we have the 5 years into the future, and you can see that besides 13-14 year, a few years ago we had a negative, everything has been positive, and we are projecting it to stay positive. So that's a good thing, because even if our September enrollment comes in a little bit lower than we want, we still have 2 years of history that kind of mitigate what that is. So our last year, our current year that we'll have for projecting the budget is only determined in 1/3 of our 3-year average, not 2/3 of it. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Yeah, it just mutes the impact. For instance, I was with, there's pros and cons to that, right? If you're a declining enrollment district, there's another component that helps you, and it slows the impact. But if you're a fast-growing district, something that, for instance, Sun Prairie, when we were talking to them the other day, they're not real excited about the 3-year average. And I guess there's been some discussion about 5-year average because they're growing so fast, they're not getting the money fast enough to serve the kids. So it fits a slower growing district pretty well, and it fits a declining district a little bit to the benefit of them, but faster growing districts create some issues. Now on to open enrollment history, which we talked about here in a second. You also see, based on the chart here, that we have a positive trend there. We have a slight trend with our outs, but we've had a larger increase with our ins. The darker orange is the ins, lighter yellowish orange is kind of the outs. Here is what I was mentioning before. If you were wondering where our students go and where they come from, here's a pretty good breakdown. where they're coming from. You see we have a number of students that come from Madison. We do have some that go to Madison, but we're almost net 100 there. Stoughton is also a district that sends us quite a few students, 53 in, only 10 out. And then Evansville and Belleville kind of pick up the third and fourth positions for our district. So this is kind of trying to add things together for you. Resident enrollment was 3725 in 16-17. Our projection next year would be 3789, which is a fairly significant increase. Three-year average shows an increase of about a little less than 50. So that 50 times the $10,000 is a nice increase in our enrollment. Even if we don't hit that number, we're going to have probably an increase unless we significantly see a number of students decrease. It would have to be fairly significant. We should show an increased revenue limit for dollars produced by the revenue limit. And then open enrollment, that there is no three-year averaging. So we would hope that those 300, 313, and that is, we don't really have data on that except for what's happened in the past. We would anticipate 13 more students are here this next year than were here last year. Or, I'm sorry, next year than are here this year. And our open enrollment, we're projecting right now a little bit of a decrease there. And that's been a trend we've seen over time. If you added those together, you're going to be at your little over 4,000 number. As far as the number of students we serve, we're going to be right around the 4,000 actually once you subtract the open enrollments out. Am I done? So I didn't put the numbers on there in the last part of the packet because the numbers are fairly significant and there's still a lot of unknowns, but I would feel comfortable saying, and I shared this with our administrative team the other day, it looks like we're going to have a little bit more fiscal flexibility than we've had in the last several years. That's a good thing. We still do need to fully implement the teacher compensation system. And there also are some other demands on our staff that we may be able to address, which we haven't been successful at addressing in the future or in the past. So the numbers are a little, like I said, fairly significant in there, but I guess I'm expressing caution until we get a little bit further into the state budget, because some of the numbers out there are pretty optimistic, I think, based on the state budget, but it's definitely a good sign.
The 200?
The 200 might be a little bit optimistic, but I think 100 is extremely rational and a good planning number, and perhaps even a little bit above that. I think we'll end up somewhere between 100 and 200. I just don't know where that number is if I had to look at my crystal ball at this point. So it's better than if you asked me 2 weeks ago. I was saying, let's hope for 100. So 100 went from the ceiling to the floor, and so that's a good thing.
Always helps to be in campaign mode, doesn't it? When we're in the biennial budget. That was just a rhetorical.
Yeah, I'm not the politician.
Okay. Anybody have, Andy, this was really good. Any questions of Andy on the data? Charlie, what do you think?
Not so much a question, actually, I had a chance to go to a meeting on the budget for up at Wasby offices with the Wisconsin Public Education Network, and they were throwing a lot of numbers around in terms of what might be anticipated. One of the things which was mentioned with regard to the $200 increase in categorical aid was that a portion of it was currently contingent on some numbers as to how much the state may save by going to a self-insured system, and the predictions in terms of saving perhaps as much as 60,000, perhaps losing as much as 130. So the number isn't really solid at this point.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the state budget process, so it'll be interesting to watch. In the past, the Republicans in charge of the legislative process have always tried to be done by July 1st. I think I've heard one of the leaders say that if things don't go their way, they're willing to hold the process up. So that obviously would put a little bit more uncertainty into us longer into this year.
I might just mention by way of reference too that it's my understanding from talking to staff in Senator Nygaard's office that Representative Kitchens will be heading up a task force looking at public funding for education, and there might be some opportunities for board members or parents or others to weigh in on that.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. Jeff, anything?
Just regarding the Fitchburg development,
Yeah.
did we take any wags at what that might mean to us in the next couple of years, or are we not thinking about it yet?
I didn't put that into this process. I think based on the task force that's getting together, I think there will be ample opportunity for that kind of information to kind of flow through that process.
Yeah. Brian and I talked about, and I think Andy's been in the loop of retaining someone who's an expert in projecting out population growth and data that other districts have used. And I think if we haven't already sealed him up, he's going to be, we're set with him.
We are, I haven't signed the contract yet, but Mark Roffers Consulting Group, and they've worked with 5-6 different Dane County schools that are in a similar situation to us, and their work has been excellent. They will actually identify a list of subdivisions in the district, identify turnover, and come up with some enrollment projections over time. And Mark has presented to Dane County superintendents a couple of times, and I've done reference checks with all of the Dane County districts that he has worked with, and it has been exceedingly favorable, and really will give the board a longer-term view of where our subdivisions are going, and of course the new subdivision will get factored into that as well.
And just so you understand, this is part of the annual report for next year's. This helps us frame up next year's budget, but we're going to get all that information to Andy to work into our developmental models. And where this plays in with what the board's going to do, the first meeting in March, we're going to have the board sit as a committee of the whole, and we will get information from the administrative team and Brian using these numbers and the potential dollar revenues, additional dollar revenues, and look at priorities. We're doing this much earlier in the process than we have in the year than we have before. We used to not get this till May or June at some point in time, so we're doing it earlier. So anticipate that first meeting in March we'll have a section of the board working as a committee of the whole with Brian and Andy and other 18 members to kind of get presented to us potential options for our consideration. Okay? But with that, given that context, more questions or any questions or comments for, I gotta go here.
Yeah.
No? Yeah.
My questions are about open enrollment. I know based on what you said in here in terms of our January 23rd meeting where we capped kindergarten at 22, what impact is that going to have on our open enrollment numbers? Do we see open enrollment usually comes younger? So 4K kindergarten, is that when there's most enrollments come, and then when they do open enroll, they stay? And are we hurting ourselves to a certain extent by saying we're capping it, which would be 1st through 3rd, as you note here, grades?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
it does make sense, and it's not an easy question to answer, I don't think. We were trying to not have pressure to add sections, partially because we're starting to fill up classrooms at those levels, and then that creates other issues with specials and those types of things. So we were trying to kind of manage that a little bit. If we were in a situation where our 3-year average wasn't going up, I would be a little bit more perhaps aggressive with open enrollment. But since we're growing a little bit, kind of wanted to tap the brakes before we create other issues.
I guess my question is, by us tapping the brakes on that, is that going to hurt us down the road? Because we can use numbers in open enrollment in higher grades, and we're stopping it.
Right.
See what I'm...
So the question, unfortunately, I think to answer that really well, you need a crystal ball to figure out if we're going to continue to grow. If you were to grow residentially, as I said before, residents, we get a little over, getting closer to $11,000 per student. we're open enrollment, we're like around 7. So there's a $4,000 40% bonus, if you would, to have residents. And so my strategy has been, since we're starting to get a little bit constrained at our schools, to keep room for residents rather than the open enrollment. So yeah, we might be giving up some revenue there, but obviously it comes with expenses too.
And as long as we're healthy and firm.
First, I would add to Andy's point, there is an opportunity for us in June to revisit the open enrollment seats. So parents right now don't know what's open, what's closed in Oregon. If we saw an influx at the first, second grade, we will have to make a judgment call on opening seats and then hoping we can fill those seats, but it would likely cause us to hire an additional staff member, or potentially a couple of staff members, so we have the enrollment. So we get one more shot at it for this year. It's not final, Gina, until June, I think, 15th, in that neighborhood. So we'll have one more recommendation to the board on that.
And one of the reasons why we're conservative is you can always say yes later, but you can't say no.
Okay, yeah. Andy, you mentioned something that I've been kind of watching, and that's the full implementation of the teacher compensation plan. You said there was still some implementation that needed to be done. What I'm aware of is that we've got positions for lead teachers that have not been filled. Is there any other part of the program that has not been implemented that you were thinking of?
Yeah, so the teacher comp system is actually, for staff members, is actually implemented over 3 years. So there was a 3 years phase-in. The majority of it was implemented this year for teachers, but there is still some steps that happen over the next couple of years. And so we needed to have, we had bet basically around $350,000 a year for the next 2 years to fully implement that plan. And so based on the numbers that you see in the report, I'm feeling pretty confident that we're doing all right. There was a little bit of a strategic assumption when we were doing that. And so having these numbers before you, I think everything's going to work out fine.
So just specifically, within 3 years, you expect all of those positions to be?
Well, the 5,
Right.
I think if we need those, I would say that, which was based on the plan, I think that very well, yeah, I think we would be able to fund those.
Thanks.
Gwen?
I have some concerns about, this past week, our governor said that if school districts do not comply specifically to the Act 10, that they won't receive funding.
Sure, so that has to do with the health insurance?
Yes, and then they're asking people to pay 12%.
Right.
And how does that affect our
I've,
compensation?
yeah, let me jump that for a minute. I've talked with Gina about that. We had a conversation in passing when I was in. We're aware that that's out there, potentially. You know, that's being floated, and we've got a lot of different options that we can explore, none of which we want to, bring up until we can see what the proposal is from Governor Walker. We've got to.
So we have to sit on our hands
Yeah.
and wait and see,
We're just going to wait and see, but there are ways to deal with that issue.
because I don't want to lose. I mean, it seemed, there's a bit of a political snafu with that too. It's like a certain amount of taking away local control, and I find that problematic.
Yeah, Gina?
Well, the other thing that I just want to remind everyone, since it's a public meeting, is right now our full-time employees do contribute 12% to the premium. Now, if they do the health risk assessment wellness component, then we do a 2% premium incentive. But right now, if you don't participate in that, we are at an 88% board contribution. Now, obviously, I don't know the final language, if any, that's going to be adopted, but I did just want people to know, because we do have some employees that do choose not to participate, and they do pay the 12% share.
But that is a topic that we're on top of, and we're just going to watch to see what happens, and there are ways to deal with it.
Which brings me, Gina, another question, which maybe I should ask down the road about. I get questions and I need to be informed on how to answer those.
Well, my door is always open for employees that have questions as well, so you can always feel free to
Of course, I
send
know
people
that, but I'm just saying that, you know, today it was, people are, our employees are nervous, and I think we need to at least, you know, lower the anxiety.
I think the best way you can handle that, Gwen, is refer them to Gina. Any other questions? Any other questions?
Well, and I think it's kind of interesting to pit educators against students, which is,
Okay, well,
because
let's-
we're not a part of that, our district isn't part of that, and
I
yet
think we should move on.
the implication is problematic.
Okay, Charlie?
Yeah, Andy, I wonder if you might help provide a little historical perspective. You talk in terms about $11,000. Roughly what portion of that is state aid versus property tax? And has that balance or proportion shifted significantly over the years?
I would not say significantly. I would say 6-7% kind of shifts type of thing. We are pretty close, as I recall, from our budget packet, and that answer is in that, from October. I think we're pretty close to 50-50. Pretty close to that.
And that over the last 5 years?
Yeah,
Fairly
yeah.
stable and-
5-6% swing in there. Nothing much more than that, I don't think. But yeah, if you went to the budget packet that's on the web, there is a historical graph that shows that.
Okay. Great, thanks, Andy. That's a great jump-off point for us as we're going to work through our budget considerations over the next month or 2 months. So, all right, next on our agenda is committee reports. We had stuff from policy. Anything additional, Barb, on policy?
Our regular meeting is normally the first Tuesday of the month, but in March, it's going to be the second Tuesday of the month, March 14th. And I think Gina already sent out a notice electronically for those of you who want to put that on your calendars.
Great. Thank you. Jeff, Vision.
Vision Steering met on January 25th, and the topics of discussion at that meeting were potential transportation changes, potential changes to the school day, and the youth sports task force. And it just so happens that those will be the same 3 topics at our next meeting on the 22nd. So not this week, even though this Wednesday is the 3rd Wednesday, it's next week, the 22nd, will be the next Vision Steering.
And that's at 7:30 at the...
Yes.
Okay.
I'll send it to you.
Great. Thank you. Brian, 2017-2019 state budget, that's yours, right?
Yes, a couple of quick comments, and I'm going to start with the issue that Charles raised. On Friday, I had the opportunity, we had our Dane County Superintendents meeting, and John Forrester, the School Administrative Alliance lobbyist, came and spoke to us, and he addressed the issue of what if the state health insurance plan doesn't run, or there isn't the savings that was anticipated. And John's perspective was that would cost districts, on assuming we get the $200, about $5 in the first year and about $10 in the second year of the biennium. So it impacts us. It doesn't impact us to the degree of dropping 200 to 150, but a small impact.
And how does that impact us? Do that?
Because that would be money that's not available for, as the governor's reallocating in
Okay.
that $200 amount.
You know, the other impact that we have to watch possibly because of that is if, when the self-insured goes, is the impact on premium rates in Dane County with the HMOs. I mean, we've got fixed for 17-18 at 0, but the concern is what happens in 18-19 to the local, so we'll have to watch that.
That was John's point. It's going to
Yeah.
impact all Dane County schools as that shift occurs. And I have 4 or 5 items that John shared, and I just thought I would bring you up to speed. It's not an all-encompassing, and we are waiting for the WASB to put together their analysis, and you're familiar with some of these matrix. They identify the DPI, Tony Evers' budget. They may identify the WASB's take and the governor's take on the budget. I'm guessing, I talked to Dan Ross Miller, the lobbyist at the WASB last week. He thought a week and a half or so they might be able to have that. But next on the agenda with the governor's budget is the Joint Finance Committee's public hearings, which will occur in March and April. That's usually a tour that goes around the state, has 4 or 5 stops, and districts have the opportunity, and citizens in the state of Wisconsin have the opportunity to comment on all of the budget proposals. And there's usually a strong contingent talking about or addressing public school concerns. On the school finance side, I think everyone is locked in on the numbers. It's roughly $200 in 17-18 and $204 in 18-19, and of course the attached string, as Gwen mentioned and Steve commented on it as well, is the 12% payment of health insurance, and it's a little foggy of what that all means. We may already be in a situation where we've accomplished that with our premium reduction.
Brian, but the $200 isn't an increase in our revenue limit.
No.
It's a state aid, and but it's outside the formula
Yeah,
for the limit.
Yeah, here's how I would, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Don't go.
Here's how I would describe that. If it's in the revenue limit, it's sort of locked and continues on and on and on. Historically, when it's been in a categorical aid, it's also locked to a degree because the categorical aid typically doesn't get reduced. But if you ask school finance experts like the one sitting behind me, he would be sleeping much better at night if that were in our revenue cap amount. But either way, $200 is still $200. It's just not in the ultimate form that we as school districts would like to see it. Another concept which has, it had the Dane County superintendents really talking about is the notion of lifetime DPI licenses. And in the governor's budget is the idea that the Department of Public Instruction will no longer have a licensing department, and once you get your initial license from DPI, you'll still get an initial license, you will have a lifetime license. And the rationale, as we understood it, was with the strength of educator effectiveness is really the tool now that the state's using to, I'll say, manage the public school workforce. I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with all of that, but there is a chance that all licenses, all of us, irregardless of our experience level, will have lifetime license. I guess this is a 30-plus year cycle because the last lifetime license issued by DPI were in 1980. So it's a long time ago. And we were still processing through as Dane County superintendents what all of that meant. Some people thought it was a positive, some people thought it was a negative. I just haven't had enough time to really process through all of the details on that. In terms of what I believe to be a positive, the mental health, there is funding for mental health support to hire more social workers to the tune of $6.5 million statewide. Now, if we received a grant for $6.5 million worth of social workers, that would be incredible. When you look at it across the state, that's about 75 to 100 social workers. And remember, there are 430 school districts. So while it sounds great on paper, it's still not a huge, significant increase for public schools. There was comment about eliminating the energy efficiency revenue limit. And while, Andy, we really haven't taken advantage of that because Andy's been ahead of the game on energy conservation, for some school districts that was really a critical piece across the state where they've been behind the scene or behind the times in terms of energy efficiency. We had conversation about the voucher increases. I don't have a lot of details about that. My general perspective is any increase in private school vouchers is money that comes out of the equalization aid formula, therefore it's money that comes out of public school funding, therefore I tend not to like that. You can draw your own conclusion on that. Charles mentioned the issue of rural school districts. I was pleased to see that the governor's budget had some increases for rural district, and this notion of sparsity aid, which is for districts that are under 745 students and have less than 10 students per square mile. What a convoluted formula. They would get a $100 per student increase, and that is really significant when you think of $100 for a student enrollment that's 745 or less. Another advantage for rural districts is high-cost transportation aid. We obviously are not a high-cost transportation aid district because we're in a metropolitan suburban area. And there's also an increase for transportation aid for students that travel greater than 12 miles to school. I don't think we have any students that travel greater than 12 miles to school. So it doesn't impact us, but in the bigger picture of the state of Wisconsin, that is a significant cost for rural school districts. The budget proposal is off to the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, and what I read from Bob Lang, he's been the director of the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. I don't think that man ages. It seems like 30 plus years, and he's going to need 3+ weeks for the Legislative Fiscal Bureau to do their evaluation of the governor's budget, and then we'll receive a copy. Just before I moved back to this chair, I sent all of you the budget in brief, which is an electronic document. I prefer not to give you a paper document because it's about 80 pages, and I downloaded it off the governor's budget website. The pages of interest, I think it's page 10 where it starts on public schools, but there's a real nice table of contents, and you can look at the background information, and it lists whatever the governor has written about the budget, which might be a little different than how that budget actually gets implemented. And of course, the legislature has to have their review process. So that's what I know as of today, and tomorrow we'll probably learn a few more interpretations of the 17-19 state budget.
And keep us updated, Brian, as we move forward. Okay, Superintendents Report.
This will be short. First, we have congratulations to Eric Hawkinson. I think all of you know Eric, also known as Hawk. He is a high school technology education teacher, and he will be recognized with an award of excellence during the Wisconsin Technical Education Association's annual conference coming up in early March. And this award is provided to tech educators for exemplary achievement in technology education. Jim and I had the opportunity to attend last year's celebration as well, and Ned Lease, one of our technology educators, received the award last year. Jeff might remember this name. Do you remember Jim Ott?
Yes.
I'm guessing you, because you and I were watching Milwaukee News as we were growing up, and Jim Ott was a meteorologist in Milwaukee, and he is now a legislator in Mequon, and he and Senator Alberta Darling from River Hills are circulating a bill to repeal the September 1 start date. And it looks like that has been gaining some momentum, and little did I know that my meteorologist growing up would actually be providing a bill that's going to help public schools. So I think it closes this Friday in terms of co-sponsorship, so we're hoping that to be the case. And then the last item, the middle school had an exciting week last week, and we had Channel 27 come to the middle school and film a special segment on a program called Act Now, and it's a bully prevention program. Darren was our teacher, Darren Hartberg was our teacher, and they interviewed Darren as well as 2 of our students, and we had really positive press. And if I listened correctly to the segment, over 93,000 students in the state of Wisconsin are part of this Act Now program when you look sort of from the southern part of the state to the northern part of the state. I think there's 865,000 kids total in the state, so about 1/8, 1/9 of our students are involved in the program. So I will stop with that and see if you have any questions.
Thanks, Brian. Closing. Future agenda, you should have a proposed agenda for our February 27th meeting. In terms of action items, we don't have anything there except for canceling our March 27th meeting because that's around break time. But we did plan on having an update on educator effectiveness, and that came out of our session in Milwaukee and where that is, so that would be good. And then we'll do our superintendent's evaluation, have our closed session. I'm in the process of putting together our thoughts, and I'll get those to you prior to that meeting so that you have a chance to review it and we can have some consultation regarding that. Okay? I tried to get a start on it for this meeting, but these visitors just kind of descended on the house and we had to get things ready. So we'll do it next week. Anything that anybody wants to be considered for the agenda, Charlie?
I thought I might raise a question whether there might be an opportunity for some continuing discussion relating to perhaps a report back on some of the conversations around the budget. I've been going to some meetings and relating to this. And on March the 7th, I'm going to be going to the Capitol with some students to talk to Representative Kitchens, who's going to be heading up this task force on funding. I thought there might be some opportunity for some input from the board in terms of messages that the board might like to communicate relating to that. The other thing I thought I would raise as a question, as I'm sure you're aware, I'm not running for re-election of the board, but I thought I might raise the question whether there would be an interest in having some continuing reports in terms of liaison to the board for legislative issues. My intention is to continue to stay connected with what's happening at the Capitol, even after leaving the board, and just thought I would raise the question whether there'd be some interest in or value of having some periodic reports back in terms of what's going on up there. I would just reiterate to a point I made at the last meeting too, there's been some encouragement to consider asking board members, every board member, to take some responsibility of connecting with and developing a relationship with members of the legislature. I don't want to be the only voice up there. So if you have any interest, I would be delighted in having an opportunity to talk to you further about what we might do in that regard.
I will work with Brian on how we can facilitate that communication best with the students. Anything else? Jeff?
There's a good chance we'll have a charter for the youth sports task force from Vision Steering.
Got that? Gwen?
If there's enough time, I would like to hear some of the feedback and good things coming from the teacher compensation, where we're at, just an update. Nothing, no action item, just a discussion,
I'll talk with Gina about that.
if you have time.
Anything else? Okay. I will work with Janie and Brian to finalize that agenda. I think you can plan that maybe we'll have a second meeting in March off. Checkout. Jeff?
The regionals or mock trial competitions were this last weekend in Janesville. And this year, Oregon had enough students participating to field 2 teams, and they took second and third. So the second place team will be participating at the state competition next month. So congratulations to the students, and thanks to Mr. Towns for being our coach.
Do we have a certain affiliation with the second team?
My son is an expert witness.
Of course he is. For team 2, that's going to state?
Yes.
Good, enjoy it. Barb?
Nothing to
Krista?
Two things. One is a follow-up to Brian. I did see that the president of the Wisconsin Dells Convention and Visitors Bureau has come out against school start date change, and I was actually part of the tourism industry when that was enacted, and Wisconsin Dells led the charge to have that enacted, so it's going to be really interesting to see how the Wisconsin Dells lobby moves forward. Second thing was, I just wanted to send a word out to our friends in Monroe. They've had a really tough week, and it's pretty sad.
Nothing from me.
Gwen?
Nothing for me.
I will make sure we communicate with the board president. And with that, I would entertain a motion. Oh, Charlie?
Yeah, just a brief comment or observation. A lot of discussion has been around the categorical increase, which I think is welcome. Obviously, still interested in seeing what the details are. One of the questions I would raise, I think is a concern generally, not so much for this district, statewide, is the categorical A basically is $200 goes per student, every district across the state. And it in effect has the impact of widening the disparity often between well-off districts like Fox Point, Shorewood, and other districts that are struggling. It's across the board the same amount, irrespective of the property wealth or the relative affluence of the district. And so I'm hoping there will be an opportunity in discussions coming up. We're looking at the whole issue of financing public schools, to take a look more broadly at how we finance public education.
Thank you, Charlie. With that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 8:15. Thanks, everyone. See you in a couple weeks.
Yeah, right?
See you next Wednesday. Oh, are you coming to the vision or are you just going to talk?
I don't know.